Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa faqihna idha jahilna wa zidna 'ilman nafi'an wa 'amalan mutaqabbalan ya kareem wa ba'd. Today we're going to do the first of two, possibly three sessions, speaking around issues related to death, how to deal properly according to our religion, the process of death, when somebody's close to dying, when somebody's died, how to fulfill the rights of that person. And the reason why this subject has been chosen. Number one, because as we're going to see when we start going through this, there are a number of things that we assume to be right when we deal with somebody who's dying. But as we're going to see, there are practices that we do which are actually culturally based, which go against our religion. And this is the one place more than anywhere else that you don't want to go against your religion. It's the one place, if you want to bend the rules and compromise, it's all good and well whilst you're living, but when somebody's died, that's the one point you don't want to mess around. And even though it may cause problems with the living, as we're going to see, there's some issues that we're going to bring up, and we're going to see it's going to cause problems. But it has to be spoken about and it has to be dealt with, because every one of us has a responsibility to our loved ones who die, to ensure that they leave this world in the best possible way and in the way that the Prophet ﷺ showed us. So this is part of trying to correct a lot of ignorance that we assume to be part of our religion, Jahiliyyah, that has nothing to do with our religion, but it's taken to be part of our religion. One of the things about funerals and death, everybody's got something to say about it. Everybody's got an opinion, although most people don't know what they're talking about. And that happens in everything in religion. It becomes a major issue around death and dying. So that's maybe the main reason why we want to speak about it. The other reason, which is a lot of things that we speak about, this should be spoken about in the masjids. This is a subject that the imams and the khatibs in the masjid should be speaking about all the time. When you go to a funeral and you see people just laughing and joking and talking normally as though they're at some social club, the next Friday the khatib should get on the mimbar and tell people. That's what the mimbar is there for. That's what the mosque is there for. That's the reason why the khatib is appointed as the khatib. It's not there just to say the normal spiel that we hear all the time. It's there to correct the mistakes that have crept into communities. So this is also about filling a void. There's a void. Nobody speaks about these issues. Nobody speaks about the wrongs that take place. So it's an attempt to correct that. The first thing that we're going to look at, let's see if this is right. The importance of why we speak about this. One of the most commonly known surahs in the Quran, because it's one of the last surahs in the Quran, Surah Al-Takathur, Al-Hakum Al-Takathur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, He, in the strongest of terms, in the strongest of language, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to shake us, telling us to think about death, to think about the process involved in dying. Al-Takathur, just look at the translation of it. Competing for more distracts you. What's competing for more? It's for more wealth. It's for more business, for a better salary, for a larger family, a better home, a better car. That's all for most of us. That's all our occupation, that's all our concern, and that's what drives us. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-Hakum, it distracts you. It turns you away from that which is certain, which is that you'll go to your graves. حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ. The absolute certainty that we have. And death in the Quran is termed as al-yaqeen. Al-yaqeen, certainty. وَعْبُدَ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Worship your Lord until certainty comes to you. Why is it called certainty? Because there's one thing that we're certain of in our lives is that we're going to leave this world. And everything that we do, family, money, wealth, business, everything that we do in this world, we know for certain it will come to an end at a particular point. And so all of what we do in terms of building up wealth in this world is just a distraction from the real thing that matters, which is the meeting with our Lord, that we're going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the strongest of terms, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ, you will definitely see hellfire. And you will definitely see hellfire is important to you because, in this verse it's important because every single human being, without exception, no exception to this, every single human being has to face hellfire. And every single human being has to cross hellfire. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. Every single one of you has to cross it. There's no exception. There are things on the Day of Judgment where people are excused. Some people will not be questioned. Some people will not face the difficulty of the sun a mile overhead. Some people will be shaded under the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people will avoid the questioning. But nobody will miss crossing over the bridge. Nobody escapes that. Every single person with the eyes will see hellfire without any exception. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminding us in the most absolute terms that whilst you busy yourself in this world, you're not going to escape having to see hellfire. So that's the first reason why we need to reflect more about this, think more about the journey beyond. And then every soul tastes death. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. This verse is repeated twice in the Quran. Every soul tastes death. And the second of the two verses is mentioned in relation to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is mentioned in relation to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَمَا جَعَلْنَا لِبَشَرٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ الْخُلْدِ. We have not given immortality to any human being before you. Every soul, every human being has to leave this world, including the prophets, including the final messenger. Al-Ghazali rahimahullah and others mentioned, he said that whenever you struggle with thinking about death and you get too absorbed in this world, so just remember the Prophet ﷺ and how he left this world. Just remember how the Prophet ﷺ left this world. There is no exception to this process, including the Prophet ﷺ. For his rahmah, his mercy for his ummah, he told us what's the best way for those around you when a loved one dies, how to help them in terms of their soul leaving this world. So reflect over that. Every soul, without exception, including the prophets, including the greatest of all, had to leave this world. No human being has immortality. Every soul will remain in this world for a period of time, and then it must move on to the barzakh. It must move on. And the process of death and dying is how to honour the body. That the soul has left that body, how to honour that body as a living, how we should honour the body of those that have gone. We've already mentioned this verse. وَمَا جَعَلْنَا لِبَشَرٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ الْخُلْدِ أَفَإِن مِتَّ فَهُمُ الْخَالِدُونَ. But we never granted immortality to any human being before you. And then, these are all just ayat and hadith. Just before we get into the details, just to tell us the importance of why we need to speak about this. The hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, perhaps the most important one around the subject. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَكْثِرُوا مِن ذِكْرِ هَذِهِ اللَّذَّاتِ. Make much mention of the destroyer of pleasures. What's the pleasures that we assume? We assume pleasures, the pleasures of this world. In reality, there is no pleasure in this world. Na'im ad-dunya, the pleasures of this world, are nothing in comparison to the eternal pleasures of paradise. What we assume to be pleasures in this world, it distracts us. And as we're immersed in the pleasures of this world, the Prophet ﷺ says to bring you back to reality, which is that at any point you're going to have to leave this world. Any point you have to leave this world, prepare yourself for leaving this world by always remembering that at any point you could die. Remember, like here now we're talking about the introduction, speaking about loved ones, how to help loved ones. Forget loved ones for a moment. Think about yourself. Think about yourself. One of the most powerful spiritual reminders and one of the most powerful ways of dealing with spiritual diseases is just to keep on thinking about death. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told one of the companions, He said, when you wake up in the morning, don't expect to see the night. And when the night comes, don't expect to see the morning. And when you wake up in the morning, you say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana. You thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's brought you back to life. Because at any point you could have died in your sleep. When the morning comes, you don't know if you're going to see out the night, if you're going to see out that day. Don't assume you're going to live until you're 60 or 70. Don't even assume you're going to see out that day. That's what the Prophet ﷺ has told you. And if you're really on the ball, don't even assume you're going to see out moments, let alone 12 hours or 24 hours. Keep on reminding yourself of the imminence of death. Just remind yourself that you have a fixed end point. That you have a fixed end point. The beginning point is just moving down. Your life is one clock that is winding down. End point is not changing. The end point is not changing. You cannot delay that, you cannot bring it forward. There's nothing you can do that will change the end point. You're just living out moments, that is your existence. And once the moment has come, nothing you can do can change it. So what you want is to face that moment in the best of ways. We're all going to see the angel of death. But there's two ways we can see him. One, we may see him and hear him. See him in the most beautiful manner, most beautiful form. Like Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ, when he asked the angel of death, show me how you appear to the believers. And he saw the most beautiful of forms. And Ibrahim ﷺ said, if that's the only reward that the believer gets when he leaves this world, it's enough. The only reward that he gets, just seeing the angel of death for the believer. Which is why you see believers smiling when they die. Why do they smile? Because what they've just seen. They've seen Azrael ﷺ in the most beautiful forms, and they've heard the words, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. Those are the words that you want to hear, and the whole of your existence revolves around those words. If you heard the angel of death saying to you, O soul that is content, that's happy, return back to your Lord, radiyya with Allah subhanahu, happy with Allah subhanahu, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy with you. That's what you want. That's what you want your end moment to be. And your whole existence is moving down to that moment. But there's another way you could see the angel of death. So keep on reminding yourself that you have to leave this world. You have to leave this world. What we're going to look at, now we're going to go through some details. I'm going to look at practical details. I mentioned it was theory. Theory just means that we're not going to have a demonstration. That'll come next in our next session. Today what we're going to try and cover, what are the sunnahs that a person should do around somebody who's dying? When somebody's on his deathbed, what are the sunnahs that we should try and fulfill around the person who's dying? And then when that person has died, what should you do straight away? What should you do to that person who just died? And then we move on from that point onwards, issues, we'll speak of practical issues around the point of death itself, and then we'll look at issues around, there's quite a few issues around the process of dying that we'll go through. Hopefully next month, in our next session, or not hopefully we'll go through the process of washing and shrouding a dead body, explain the process of janazah prayer, explain the process of going to the graveyard, how we should go to the graveyard, what's the adab involved in it. And we may well add on a third session where we look at the issue around wills, around inheritance, around bequest, wills, so that everybody's clear on from the beginning to the end of the process. So it may well extend to 3 sessions. So the first thing we're looking at, what should a person do if somebody who's close to you or anybody you know is about to die? The first thing, if you know somebody's death is imminent, you've been told by doctors that person's about to die, invite Salihin to be present. Try and have somebody who you know to be a man or a woman of God to be present. Invite family members to be around. Family members and people who are righteous, Salihin. People who know what to do at that point. Because unfortunately, as we said, there's a lot of jahl. There's a lot of ignorance about people. People are going to come around somebody who's dying and they're going to be arguing about what to do at that point. And just a little point, and this is going to repeat itself. When somebody's dead, dying or dead, don't argue. Don't argue. Especially when you don't know what you're talking about. And that's with anything in religion, but more so when somebody's dying or dead, don't argue. Leave it to those who do know. Take advice, which is why it's important throughout the process of dying, you have Salihin present. You have people of knowledge, people who can guide you, people who can tell you what's the sunnah of the Prophet to do in all of this. So the first thing, try and ensure when somebody's about to die, you bring somebody who you know to be a man or a woman of God, such people attract righteousness with them. Angels are present. Angels are attracted towards people of goodness and people of righteousness. The second thing, when somebody's dying around, somebody who's about to die, the Prophet ﷺ told us to read Surah Yasin. To read Surah Yasin. And this is both at the point that person's about to die. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us that it makes easy for the soul to leave this world. Surah Yasin makes it easy for the soul to leave this world. What is it about Yasin? What is it particularly about Yasin? The Prophet ﷺ described Yasin as qalb al-Quran. It is the heart of the Quran. Yasin is the heart of the Quran. And at that point, the person who's dying, he can't really do much at that point. He can't get up and pray. He may not even be able to do dhikr or anything. He's in a very difficult situation. He's suffering at that point. He's suffering at that point. The only thing that will make it easy for him at that point is Surah Yasin. The heart of the Quran. Why? Because now it's about his heart. At that point, as he's leaving this world, he hasn't got any a'mal that he can do. He can't do many actions. His heart needs to be alive with faith as he's leaving this world. So just have Yasin being read around that person as much as possible and repeat it. Repeat it. You've read it once, read it again. A second time, read it a third time. Keep on reading Surah Yasin around the person who's dying. In some tafsir, it is mentioned that with every single ayah of Surah Yasin, when it is read around somebody who's dying, 10 angels descend. 10 angels come down. And Surah Yasin has over 80 ayahs. So as you're reading Surah Yasin, angels after angels after angels are coming down. And that will make it so much more easier for that person as he leaves this world. So one of the most important things around the person who's dying is recite Surah Yasin. And while you're with that person who's dying, it says only speak about the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only speak about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't matter how bad a life that person lived. As long as he's a Muslim, he's now in the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can't do anything else at that point. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in a hadith Qudsi, I am the way my slave imagines me to be when he thinks of me. What's the importance of thinking about mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That if you keep on thinking about that at the point that you're dying, or you keep on putting into that person, he's like, now I've done all haram. I've always drunk, I've never prayed, I never paid my zakah. Say, okay, you've lived your life, that's gone now, that's gone. You had your chance, now it's just you and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, whatever actions however much good you did, it's still the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that saves you. Whether you did or you didn't do, it's still only the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that saves you. It's nothing that you do that gets you paradise. It's only the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But whilst you're alive, you have a duty to try and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which makes it easier. But now that he's dying, just keep on telling him Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahim, he is Ghafoor, he forgives, he is Afu, he's compassionate. Don't worry about what you've done. Just keep on imagining that you have a merciful Lord, and your hope, if he leaves the world in that way, then Allah subhanahu will deal with him in that way. If he leaves the world only thinking that Allah subhanahu is merciful, he will be merciful to him. But if he thinks, I've led a bad life, and there's no hope for him, then there is no hope for him. Then there is no hope for him. If he thinks that I've led a bad life, and Allah subhanahu is going to punish me for what I've done, then it probably will be the case. The way you leave this world, the way a person leaves this world, is how Allah subhanahu will treat and will deal with that person. So whilst when you sat around somebody who's dying, it's all good and well that you're going through suffering and you're crying and you're feeling the pain and so on. But just keep on talking about rahmah, mercy of Allah, mercy of Allah. Keep on reminding that person of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fourth thing, which is one of the most important, which is not mentioned here, try and get him to say La ilaha illallah. Try and get him to say La ilaha illallah. Try and have that person say La ilaha illallah. Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, Man kana akhiru kalamihi fi dunya la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. Whoever's last words in this world, his dying words are La ilaha illallah, will enter into paradise. and will enter into paradise. All believers enter into paradise, but some enter into hellfire before paradise. The one who leaves this world saying La ilaha illallah, there's no hellfire that will touch you. No hellfire will touch you. Doesn't matter, again, doesn't matter what he's done. Doesn't matter what he's done. If the last words he ever said was La ilaha illallah, and that's it, and even if he doesn't say Muhammad Rasulullah, just La ilaha illallah is enough for him. If his last words are La ilaha illallah, guaranteed from the Prophet ﷺ, there's no punishment in the grave for that person. On the day of judgment, he's not going to find any difficulty. He'll cross the bridge across hellfire without any problem whatsoever, and he'll enter into paradise without any difficulty whatsoever. There's no hisab, there's no accounting for that. He's not going to get questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not going to face any difficulty in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how do you get to say La ilaha illallah at that point? Imam Junayd al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, he was asked on his deathbed, La ilaha illallah. He said, Ma nasitu hatta yadhkura. I've not forgotten to say that I need to remember now. That's how you say La ilaha illallah. If in your life you're a man of La ilaha illallah, you're a person always engaged in dhikr, you're always reading the Quran, you're a man who reads, just a side point, another thing that will guarantee protection in the grave and protection in the next world is somebody who on his deathbed reads Surah Al-Ikhlas, Qul Huwallahu Ahad. Well, how are you going to get there? That you're connected to Qul Huwallahu Ahad once you're alive. You're somebody who just loves to read Surah Al-Ikhlas. And then, as you all know, just to add, get into a habit every night of reading Surah Al-Mulk. Every night, make sure you read Surah Al-Mulk. Imam al-Haddad rahimahullah says somebody knows about what Surah Al-Mulk does and he doesn't read it, he said he's majnoon, he's insane. You know Surah Al-Mulk, everything in the next world from your grave until paradise is taken care of you. As long as you read it every night, you know that, and you don't read it, you're crazy. You're crazy. You have the ultimate insurance against any harm in the next world. So get into the habit of being somebody who's always reading La ilaha illallah, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Surah Al-Mulk every night, because that's the point where it matters. That's the point that it matters. And if you've led a bad life, it's a lot more difficult to read these things at those points. But if your tongue is used to saying Qul Huwallahu Ahad and La ilaha illallah, when you come to that point, it's a lot more easier. It's a lot more easier for you to read these things. So those are some of the things that you should concentrate on around somebody who's dying. Try and ensure that you do these things. 4 points that we mentioned. There are 1 or 2 more, but try and have these things in place around somebody who's dying. Then he dies. Then he dies. That person has died. It's confirmed now that that person has died. When a person has died, if you're present there, in addition to this, also along with this, just remember one thing, angel of death has just been. The angel of death has just been. If you're around somebody who's died, just take a lesson from that. The angel of death has just been and you've not seen him. You've not seen him. That person saw the angel of death. The angel of death come and took that person's soul. And inshallah you have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu. That person's soul went in the best of mind. That person's soul went in the best of ways. Remember that anything that you see good around the person who's dying, let people know about it. Spread it. But if you saw anything that's bad around somebody who's dying, like you saw his face like all creased up and you see him in pain and like there's a darkness that descended upon his face, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Don't go around and start saying they had a bad ending. If you know a person had a good ending, husn al-khatimah, tell everybody. Tell everybody. Spread the word around so people have a good opinion of that person. But if somebody died in a way that wasn't good, don't tell anybody. It's haram. That person can't defend himself at that point. To mention something bad about somebody who's died is worse than mentioning something bad about somebody who's alive. It's worse. This is ghibat al-mayyit. This is you are backbiting against that person who's dead. He can't defend himself. Anybody else comes and finds out, but he can come and deal with you. He can come and deal with you and defend himself. The dead cannot, but they will take their revenge on the Day of Judgment. They will have it out with you on the Day of Judgment. So if you see anything, like some darkness in that person's face, some bad smells coming out of that person, you see like some fear etched into his face, which tells you that his ending was not good, quiet. Don't let anybody know. All you should do is just go around and tell people, make a lot of dua for him. Make a lot of dua for him. We're going to speak about this. It was mentioned, we're going to speak about suicides. We'll mention about that, people who committed suicide. And we'll come back to this point in maybe the next session. First thing to mention about that, a person who commits suicide is not a kafir. He's not a kafir, he's a Muslim. He's a Muslim. Somebody many years back came to me and said, my cousin's committed suicide, and there was like a lot of pain on his face, and you could see he suffered badly at that point. It's like, what can I do for him? I said, you need to make so much dua for him. He's a Muslim. You can pray for him. Pray janazah for him, make dua for him. He's not a kafir because he committed suicide. And we will touch upon, there's some hadith that people misunderstand about. There is some hadith that people misunderstand. But when you see a person in that way, and suicide is one of the worst ways that a person can go. One of the worst ways that a person can go. But even if he has, he's still a Muslim who needs a lot of dua from him. Who needs a lot of dua from him, more than somebody. Like one brother told me not so long ago that his mother died, and he saw soon after that she was at the road of the Prophet and he saw her face smiling and so on. I said, you don't need to do anything at that point. You should make dua that you're raised with your mother. Like there are some, you will still make dua because it's a human emotion. You will make dua for everybody. But the one who's had a bad ending, that person needs far more dua than the one who's had a good ending. So bear that in mind, that at the moment of death, you're present there, you're there. Just think about the angel of death. The angel of death has just been, you've not seen him, that dead person saw him. That dead person saw him. When that person has died, you're present there. The first thing you should do, there's a number of things. One, close the eyes. The eyes of the dead person is wide open. Why? Because the last thing he saw was his soul that left his body. The soul is taken out of the body. It states in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْحُلْقُومِ وَأَنْتُمْ حِينَئِذٍ تَنْظُرُونَ. Like when the soul reaches the hulqum is the throat. Because angels, not the angel of death who takes the soul out of the body, there are angels, a'wan. There are angels that bring up the soul up until the point it reaches the throat, and then the angel of death comes and seizes. And then the angel of death comes and takes the throat, soul from the head. The soul leaves at that point. The last thing that person saw, conscious in this world, was his soul leaving his body. And that's why his eyes are wide open. And so one of the sunnahs for the mayyit, for the deceased, close his eyes. Close his eyes. And here we have a dua, and inshallah, hopefully for next time, these slides will be printed or will be passed around for everybody. But this is a dua, and as we're going to go through the whole process, there are a number of different du'as to read, and everybody should get into the habit of memorizing these, because if your loved one dies, you haven't got time to go and find out what's the dua. You need to know the dua exactly at that moment. You haven't got time to go away and start checking up what's the dua. Your father leaves this world, you've only got one chance to get it right. You've only got one chance to fulfill the right of your father or your mother or whoever of your loved one has died. So these will be given out. Make sure you learn all of the du'as that are present here, and they're etched in your mind, so when your loved one dies, even though emotion overtakes you, you know exactly what to do at that point. So you close the eyes of the deceased and you read the dua. Bismillah wa ala millati Rasulillah. So you say Bismillah, meaning in the name of Allah, I close his eyes. And on the religion of the Messenger of Allah. And then you make a dua for the dead at that point. Allahumma yassir lahu amra. Allah make easy for him his affair in the next world. وَسَهِلْ لَهُ مَا بَعْدَهُ. And make easy for him what he's going on to in the next world. وَأَسْعِدْهُ بِلِقَائِكَ. And make him happy to meet you. Make him happy to meet you. وَجْعَلْ مَا خَرَجَ إِلَيْهِ خَيْرًا مِمَّا خَرَجَ مِنْهُ. And make where he's gone to better than where he's left. It's a common thing said by Muslims and non-Muslims. He's gone to a better place. That depends if he's a Muslim. That depends. A non-Muslim has not gone to a better place. Somebody died in kufr has not gone to a better place. The dunya is the best place for the non-Muslim. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir." This world is the prison for the believer. Why? Because what's to come is better. This is nothing compared to it. And it is Jannah for the kafir. This world, why? Because it's the best it will ever be. That's why Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great Imam of Hadith, he's riding on a horse. He was a wealthy man wearing the most beautiful of clothes. And there's a poor Jewish man, an oil seller. He's wearing these ragged clothes that are covered in oil. And he looks at the Shaykh. And he looks at himself. And he says, "Ya Shaykh." He said, what type of Jannah are you, what type of Jannah am I in, and what type of prison are you in? He said, your Prophet said That this world is a prison for the believer and a Jannah for the kafir. So what type of prison are you in and what type of Jannah am I in? The Shaykh, he stops for a moment and he thinks and he answers. He says, in comparison to what I'm going to receive if I died in faith, he said, this is a prison. He said, in comparison to what you're going to receive if you die in kufr, he said, this is paradise for you. This is paradise for you. So that's why you pray. اجعل ما خرج إليه خيرا مما خرج منه. Make where it's going to better than where he came from. But that only works if he's a believer, if he's a mu'min. And then along with that, just a number of other points. When somebody's dying, bring his limbs together, his body together. Don't rely on the funeral director to come running. You need to know what to do exactly at that point. Bring his limbs together. Close his mouth. Close his mouth. The jaw would have dropped. Bring the mouth up. Wrap. Just bring something to wrap it around, to tie it together. Bring the arms together. Bring the legs together so he's lying down together. Why is this sunnah to do? They said because the honor of the dead is the same as the honor of the living. You must respect the dead body exactly as though he's living. And that's a very important point that has to be instilled within people. You must honor the dead as though that person is alive. Respect and honor the dead. Treat that body like it's a living body. So you want that body to look in the best of form. Eyes wide open, jaws have dropped. No. You want the manzar to be a beautiful manzar. Right? The way he's appearing, you want it to look as good as possible. And then in addition, when the person just died, to get something heavy and place it on his stomach. Place it on his stomach. Something heavy, because that stomach will start expanding and bloating. Put something heavy, they said preferably metal, that keeps it down. Metal keeps it down so it doesn't bloat within those few hours, that brief period of time whilst he's there, before he's going to get washed and shrouded. And then, said burn as much bakhur as possible around him. Burn as much bakhur as possible around him. Burn incense around him. Have fragrant smells around him. As much as possible in that room that person's died, has as much nice smells around him. Preferably, he said bakhur, incense. Incense is the best thing to have. And why? As we're going to see, there are 3 places where you should try and burn bakhur, incense, and have nice smells. This is one of them. Why? So that body that's going to start decomposing any bad smells that come from, it hides it. So you've only got a good thought about that person. It hides any bad smells that comes out of that person's body. It says burn incense around the deceased and let as many people as possible know. Spread the news as quickly as possible. Why? For dua. For dua. You want as many people as possible to make dua for that person who's just died. Because you don't know whose dua will be accepted. Spread it out as widely as possible. And when you hear the death of a Muslim, and this is only for a Muslim, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi, and you get rewarded for making that dua, and just make a silent dua to yourself for the person who has just died. When you hear of somebody who's just died, when you've heard of somebody who's died who's close to you, especially somebody who's close to you, family member, don't lose control over yourself. Don't go crazy at that point. There's no harm in crying. It's natural human emotion. The Prophet ﷺ cried when his son, Sayyidina Ibrahim, when he died. He cried at that point, he shed tears. And one Sahabi, when he saw the Prophet ﷺ crying and shedding tears, he said, you cry, O Messenger of God. And because think about what he's thinking. He's thinking that you're the Prophet of patience. You're sabr. You're patient, so why would you cry? Why would you cry? But then the Prophet ﷺ says, he says, these are tears of mercy. These are tears of mercy. He's rahmatan lil alameen. And his son is from him. His son is from him. He's a mercy for everyone. If the Prophet ﷺ did not cry at that point, there's no mercy within. There's no mercy within the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, which is impossible. He's a prophet of mercy. But the Prophet ﷺ did not lose control over himself. And he told us, do not cry excessively and do not make statements that are not, like he says, do not make what he called da'wat al-jahiliyyah. Like statements that are inappropriate. Like somebody will say, like, who's going to take care of us now? Like, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take him at this point? Somebody I heard saying that, Muslims saying that. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take my mother at this point? Like, the grandchildren didn't grow up and she didn't get to see the grandchildren. Don't say that. Don't say that. Say what the Prophet ﷺ said. He sent a message to his daughter, one of his daughters whose child died. And they asked the Prophet ﷺ to come. And he said, just tell her to say, Inna lillahi ma akhad, wa lahu ma a'ta, wa kullu shay'in 'indahu bi ajalin musamma. We should learn this, learn these statements. The Prophet ﷺ said, tell her to say, whatever he took, whatever Allah subhanahu took, belonged to him. Belonged to him. And whatever he gives you is his. And everything has its set time. Your child, your little baby that died at that point, whether that baby is going to live to 70 or going to die at 7 months, it's not your baby. In a real sense, that child came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can decide to let that child remain for 7 months or 70 years. It's up to him how long. So you just be happy. You just be content with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not lose control over yourself at that point. Just accept everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything has a set time. It's easier to deal with emotions than some of the old dies. When somebody young, the same. A child dies, just accept min Allahi ta'ala. That was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, as-sabru 'inda as-sadmati al-ula. Patience is at the first blow. Patience is not later on when you've recovered and say, now I'm sabr. Now I'm happy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After you lost control. And you're saying things you shouldn't have said. Now I'm patient. Well, the first moment that somebody came and told you your father's passed away, you say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You just accept it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The moment that you hear that your little baby child has died, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And remember that you have a qudwa in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you lose your baby child, and you're struggling to cope with it. Remember the Prophet, how many children did he? How many of his children outlived him? Only one, say the Fatima. Only one of his children outlived him. Any calamity, any musibah that you have in this world, the Prophet ﷺ faced it. So when you're struggling, remember that none of his sons lived out of their infancy. None of his sons were even teenagers, let alone grown men. So learn to be patient with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills and decrees for you. الصبر عند الصدمة الأولى. Patience at the moment of the first blow. That's the time when you need to be the most patient. The angels, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is particularly about the loss of a child, and we will come back to this point, because that's a more difficult one for people to bear. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when the soul of a child is taken, the angels go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they tell him that we took the soul of this child. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you took the soul of the child of my slave? They said, yes. You took the soul, ثمرة فؤاده. You took the soul of the fruit of his heart? They said, yes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what did he say? What did he say? The angel said, حمدك واسترجعك. He said, Alhamdulillah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, Ibnu lahu baytan fil jannah wa sammuhu bayt al-hamd. Build for that person a palace in paradise and call it the palace of praise. Build for the person at the moment when he hears that he's lost his child. He says, Alhamdulillah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He has a guarantee of paradise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of the patience at that moment. So there's no harm in shedding tears when you hear somebody dies, particularly someone who's close to you. And it's a natural human emotion, and it's not wrong, but what is wrong is to go to extremes. And especially because some, particularly the elderly women, they start faking these things. They start crying and pretending they're crying. Somebody walks and they start wailing and crying, and then they stop for a moment. And somebody else walks and they start crying again. These acts are prohibited, they're haram to do. They're haram to do. The Prophet ﷺ forbade extremes, especially when it's all fake and it's all just for people. Genuine emotions, real human emotions, the Prophet ﷺ did it. When the Prophet ﷺ himself passed away, Abu Bakr comes into the room, it's the Hujra of Sayyidah Aisha. That's where he passes away. And he comes and he kisses the forehead of the Prophet ﷺ with tears rolling down his eyes. And he said, Tibta hayyan wa mayyita. He said, you were pure whilst you were alive, and you were pure when you left this world. Tibta hayyan wa mayyita. What's the shahid here? He cried, he shed tears. But these were tears of love. These were tears of mercy. When the Prophet, one of the Sahaba was very close to the Prophet, his name was Uthman ibn Mad'un. When he died, the Prophet cried tears of love and of mercy. That's perfectly acceptable and normal, but not to go to excess. That's prohibited. Now the next one, which is a key issue. Now this is the first of the issues that we need to start telling people to start changing. Start changing. It has become normal here, especially here for some reason. When we come into non-Muslim lands, things start changing. It doesn't happen in Muslim lands. When a person dies, he should be buried on the same day. He should be buried on the same day. When a person dies, he should be buried on the same day. From the point of death, you wash the body, you shroud the body, pray janazah prayer, and he should be buried. And that's it. And here we have the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, عَجِّلُوا بِهِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَنْبَغِي لِجِيفَةِ مُسْلِمٍ أَن تُحْبَسَ بَيْنَ ظَهْرَانَيْ أَهْلِهِ. Hasten the burial. Do it as quickly as possible. Once it's confirmed he's dead, don't start delaying for whatever reason. Don't start holding it up for whatever reason. There may be some reason, particularly legal reasons why it has to happen. Like a post-mortem, and that's something we'll touch upon. There may be legal reasons, and legally we don't mean shar'i. We don't mean, although there are exceptions, like the janazah of the Prophet was delayed by 1 day. He ﷺ passed away on the Monday morning and he was buried on the Wednesday night. Passed away on the Monday morning, he was buried on the Wednesday night, which for us is a Tuesday night. Why the delay? Why did they delay? They said to choose the Khalifa, to choose the leader of the Muslims. Otherwise there is no delay. The Prophet ﷺ himself told us, for it is not right that the dead body of a Muslim be held amongst his family. And once that person's died, don't delay for any reason. Even, like some will say, we'll delay till Jum'ah. Friday, don't delay. The fuqaha, as an example, they mention, if a person dies on a Friday morning, do not delay it till the Jum'ah prayer. You may argue there's more people there, and there's more likelihood of somebody praying for him. Doesn't matter. Sunnah, as soon as that person dies, he is to be buried. The other possible exception here is that here we live in a place where most cemeteries are closed at night. So you have set times. You have set times where you bury. But other than that, you should really push. And just to mention it, we're going to come across one or two issues. This is the first one where it's common for bodies, the burial to be delayed here. You should go away and start discussing these matters. We don't want arguments at the point of death. No, don't argue about these issues. Go home, go to family, go to parents and start talking about these issues. So that at least these issues are cleared. So that when somebody dies, you know exactly there's an agreement amongst you about what should happen. And remember, we want everything to be done according to the Sunnah. We want everything to be done according to the Sunnah so that you fulfill the right of the deceased in the best possible manner. So do not delay in burying the deceased. Once the doctor signed the certificate to confirm death, get the ball rolling. And there should be no delay unless there's an exceptional circumstance that requires delay. It is a sunnah to bury as soon as possible. Now the other major issue, it is a requirement that a person be buried in the very city that he dies. It is a requirement that a person be buried in the very city that that person dies. The idea of taking bodies away and transporting bodies to a different city or a different country is not permitted in Sharia. It's the norm amongst Muslims. It's the norm amongst Muslims. It's not allowed in Sharia. It is prohibited to send bodies out of the town. And here we have a distinction. We know from the Sunnah, and Abu Bakr himself related this when they're discussing where should the Prophet ﷺ himself be buried. They were even discussing, should we place him beneath the earth or not? They didn't know what to do with the body of the Prophet ﷺ. Is it even suitable that we bury him inside the ground? Sayyidina Fatima comes and starts discussing. Sayyidina Bilal says to her, Ya Rayhanat Rasulillah. He says, oh flower of the Messenger of God. He says to her, if we could, we would take his body to the heavens. If we could, we would take his body to the heavens. But Allah revealed to your father, منها خلقناكم وفيها نعيدكم ومنها نخرجكم تارة أخرى. From it we created you, to it we return you back, and from it you'll be resurrected again. So they even discussed, should we even bury him inside the earth, or should we leave his body above the earth? They eventually agreed that his body must be buried. And then Abu Bakr said, I heard the Prophet mention, prophets are buried at the very spot that they died. at the very point that they die. And when you go to the road of the Prophet, the very point where he's buried, that's the point where he passed away. So with the prophets of God, it's even more specific. It's even more restricted. The very point for believers, the rest of the believers, in the town that you died, that's where that's where you were buried. In the books of Hanafi fiqh, they state it's makruh. It's makruh to take a body more than 1 mile out of the city. More than 1 mile out of the city that person died in. So the common practice of, which is getting less common, and it needs to be eradicated completely, of people having their bodies returned back to the homeland should not take place. It should not take place. Even though it's common, it is prohibited by the fuqaha. It is prohibited by the jurists. You live in a particular place, you die there, you are buried there. You live in a particular place, you die there, you are buried in that place. Bodies are not to be moved out of the place that they live in. Imam al-Nawawi in his Kitab al-Adhkar, he highlights this point. If somebody even stated a wasiyyah, a bequest, he leaves a will, he leaves a request, that when I die, I want my body sent abroad, you do not do so. You do not do so. Because he said any wasiyyah, any bequest from a dying person that contradicts Sharia cannot be carried out. Should not, and it's haram for you. And we should think of it this way. Let's say your father's dying, and he says, I want my body sent back home. Don't argue with him. Don't argue with him, but don't do it. But don't do it. Why? Because if you carry out his dying wishes, you've not confirmed the sin upon that person. What you want to do, make sure that his wishes are not carried out, so that in the barzakh he'll be thanking you. He'll be thanking you. Just as an example, this happened many years back in Liverpool. And most here would accept this, but they wouldn't accept what we're talking about. There was a convert. Her mother, she was an elderly lady. Her mother was non-Muslim. Her dying wish that she was buried next to her mother was non-Muslim, in a Christian cemetery. And what should you do at that point? The family, all of them said, no, it's her wish, we carry it out. They should never have done that. They should never. It's haram to bury Muslims in cemeteries of non-Muslims. Haram to bury Muslims in the cemeteries of non-Muslims. Even though that was her dying wish, it should never have been carried out. Why? Because now you've confirmed the sin upon that person. And the person will suffer the consequences of that in the barzakh. So now everybody here will accept, yes, if somebody says, I want to be buried in a non-Muslim cemetery, we're not going to do it. Doesn't matter. We're not going to argue with the person who's dying, we're not going to do it. Likewise, if somebody says, I want my body moved from here and sent here, it is haram to do that. It's not allowed to be done, so it should not be carried out. It should not be carried out. If you die in a place, even if you request, you're buried something else, you're buried in that place. And if you want to be buried elsewhere, then live elsewhere. If you want to be buried somewhere else, then live somewhere else and make dua to Allah subhanahu that He makes you die in Medina. Make dua to Allah subhanahu that you die in the best of place. You want to die in the best of place, buried in the best of place, make dua to Allah subhanahu that He takes your soul in that place. He takes his, like we just mentioned before we came here, one of our teachers, he mentioned that there was a man from Ethiopia, who was from the Salihin, the righteous. He would always make dua to Allah subhanahu, allow me to be buried in Al-Baqiyah. Allow me to be buried in Medina. Then just suddenly, from nowhere, he just turns to his family and says, I need to get on the plane. I need to get on the plane. He catches a plane, he goes to Medina, he gets there, he dies. He dies. And he's buried in Baqiyah. You want to be buried in a place, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if your body dies in a place, then that's where you are. That's where you want to be buried. So again, this is a point because it's common. It's still common, and it needs to be removed because it's not allowed in Sharia. It needs to be removed. There's a point that people should take on board, and they should start discussing these with family members, particularly father and mother who are elderly. Just remind them if the body returns back home, we're all here. We won't be able to visit. We won't be able to visit. But if the body is buried right next door, a mile or two away, then the haqq of the walidain, the right of your parents that you visit their graves all the time. And in some hadith it mentions, if a person was not obedient to their parents whilst they were alive, if he visits their grave regularly, he will be recorded as being obedient to his parents. He will be counted as min al-barreen, those who but that requires that the grave is nearby. That requires that the grave is nearby. So try first of all, accept that this is hukmullah ta'ala. This is the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that people need to start getting used to the idea that where you live and where you die, that's where you will be buried. When a person dies, then there comes an issue about looking at the face of the deceased and kissing the face of the deceased. Before looking at this point, first thing to mention now, has it not changed? Before looking at the issue about looking at the face of the deceased, it's become almost like a wajib of the janazah. It's become almost like a fixed, something that has to happen. Like after the janazah prayer, the body's laid out, and then everybody queues up to go and see the face of the deceased. There is no harm in seeing the face of the deceased. It was done by the Prophet, it was done by Sahaba. They came and looked at the face of the Prophet. Likewise, kissing the face of the deceased. They did that with the Prophet. Abu Bakr they did that with the Prophet. So it's accepted. But what we mentioned before, it should not be part of delay. It should not result in delay. Like some family members say, we're not going to be able to get there for a couple of hours, just hold the body, hold the body. Do not hold the body for anybody. Do not hold the body for anybody. The process of looking, kissing would normally take place before the janazah prayer. Now it's happening after, before the body's washed, before the body's shrouded. And usually it's those who are closest. It's not like a show that goes on, everybody come and start looking at it. That's not how it was originally. That's how it's become. That's how it's become. That wasn't the point of it. Like those who are present come and look and kiss the forehead and take the barakah of the salihin, take the barakah, the blessing of the righteous. But where it's made like almost a central part, that's not what it was originally meant to be. So having the body laid out there and a procession going on, so on, we should move away from it. Although again it's become something that's set, that has to take place. That's not what it was originally. If you are there when your father has passed away and one or two people have come there, then yes, go and look at the face, go and kiss the face of the deceased. But don't make that something that will delay the process of washing and shrouding and praying janazah prayer. So it is allowed to look at the face and kiss the face of the deceased, the one who's died, especially if that person is from the salihin, especially if somebody is known to be a righteous person. Then it becomes more important that takes place. Particularly about a woman, it is haram for a man who is ghayr mahram to start coming and looking at the face of somebody, of a young woman. It is haram to do that. It's allowed in this, whilst a woman is alive, because we have need to deal with people. So there's some permissibility there. But the asl, the original state, is that the whole body of a woman is awrah. The whole body of the woman is awrah. And a man should only look if there's a need to do so. There is no need if the person has died and she's not related to you. She has no ties to you, then there's no need for you to come and look. If it's an elderly lady, then it's allowed, but even then if she's not related to you, then why? So the one that, in terms of women can come and look at the face of women, and mahram males can come and look at the face, like your father, your brother, your uncle. But when the whole family, extended family turns up and everybody wants to come, like, no, it's restricted to mahram. It's restricted to mahram. Those who are related to her directly. Like father, grandfather, son, grandson, uncles, brothers, nephews. Going beyond that, no. It should be restricted to the males who are closest to her. In addition, the husband is allowed to look but not to touch her. And we're going to come back to this point about the husband. The moment that the wife dies, the husband is no longer her husband in this world. They'll be remarried in the next world. That's Jannah, that's a different story. In Jannah, they're back together again. That's a different thing. But in terms of this world, the ties are over. He's not allowed. He's ghayr mahram to her. He's ghayr mahram to her. He's allowed to look at her face and nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. In Muslim countries where they carry the shrouded bodies, there's no coffins. The husband is not allowed to carry the body. Only the mahram males are allowed to carry the body. It'll be the father. Here, because we're carrying the coffins, if it's a female, then that's allowed because you're not touching the body. But if it's a female and it's a shroud burial with no coffins, then only the mahram are allowed to touch. And the husband is not included in that. Because the moment that the wife dies, the husband is no longer husband in terms of dunya, in terms of this world. And so therefore the husband is allowed to look at the face, but not allowed to kiss or to touch any part of her the moment that she's dying. Do you want to come up now, or shall I? Okay. Some practical issues. We're going to run through these practical issues. Should have put your name on there though. This has all been taken from Muhsin. He gave me the guidelines on this. So we'll just run through this quickly, just so people have some awareness of what happens legally. Going to British law, what happens when a person dies. If a person is dying, doctors will allow for him to be taken home to die in his normal surroundings, and that's the best place for a person to die. The best place. And the reason why that's more important, if a person was to die at a hospital, then you don't have as much control over the body. And then you'll have non-Muslims such in the body, and you don't know exactly whether they'll respect the body as it should be respected, whether they will treat the body as it should be treated. Like, so try, if somebody's dying, and you have permission to take that body home, then take that body home, and allow that person to die in normal surroundings where you're responsible, and you have full control over what's taking place. Then he says, when he has died, it is normal. If it is normal hours, the doctor is called, but if it's out of hours, a nurse will arrive. The police will always arrive at a home death, who will call the funeral director if it's out of hours, with there being no guarantee of a Muslim service, and that's where the responsibility upon the Muslim family to insist that it's a Muslim who comes and deals. And it's a religious obligation, because if it's a non-Muslim who comes and deals with it, you have no guarantees of how the body will be dealt with. And the Prophet ﷺ told us, breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of the living. Anything that you do wrong to the dead body, the same as if you did it to the living person. You should treat it with the utmost respect, so you must insist that it's a Muslim funeral director that deals with it. If an emergency happens, an ambulance is called, the paramedics will come to confirm death, but will not take the body to the hospital if it has been seen by its doctor within the last 2 weeks. As long as a dead body has been seen and dealt with by a doctor within 2 weeks of dying, then that body will be left to the family. If it has not seen the doctor within... If the body has not been seen by the doctor and it's a sudden death, then you have complications that will be looked at. Once the nurse or the paramedics and the police are satisfied, a death certificate will be provided by the doctor, after which burial arrangements can be made, and nothing can be done until that death certificate has been provided. Then you can start with the washing and the shrouding, making arrangements for the burial. The body does not need to be taken to the hospital. It can remain at home or taken to the mosque. The police will escort the body if taken away from home. Sudden death. Sudden death. If a person dies unexpectedly, then a post-mortem has to take place. Unless there's a known illness that has already been identified by the doctor. And we'll come on to the point about post-mortems. If there's any suspicion about how a death is taking place, then a post-mortem is required. But there's a problem with post-mortems. There's a legal problem with post-mortems, which is that it requires that the body be cut up. The body be cut up, and all the organs of the body are going to be taken out, and the whole process, I haven't seen it, but it's been described to me, and it's a horrific process. And it's almost like the body's been mutilated completely. And that, in Sharia, is haram. It's haram to do that. The only reason why it could take place if there's a legal obligation which is unavoidable. The alternative, which is MRI scans or CT scans, where the body is X-rayed without the body being cut open. And he was telling me that that's becoming the norm now. There's a move away from post-mortems to the point where in the near future, post-mortem will not take place. But as it is right now, and as far as I'm aware, this is the funeral director's responsibility to try and push for post-mortem not to take place. But one thing that I'm aware of in the Jewish community of the same issue, post-mortems never take place. Post-mortems never take place. And they have exactly the same legal issue. It's only Muslims, because Muslims used to argue about pointless matters. When it comes to real matters, they haven't got themselves together, and they haven't been able to deal with these issues. But inshallah, there will be a shift in this matter, and it is a fard kifaya. These are obligations that Muslim communities have to deal with. They have to deal with. So ideally, because it is prohibited to cut open a human body, to do anything to a human body, post-mortem must be avoided at all cost. And only if there's no way around it, and this is down to the funeral director and the coroner, between them come to an agreement, only if there's no way around it, only then could it happen. So to say that MRI scans are an alternative, which although some doctors do not prefer, will become the norm in the near future. There are some religious communities, particularly the Jewish community, that do not have MRI scans. The funeral director can arrange with the coroner to have an MRI scan in place of a post-mortem. Both post-mortems and MRI scans take a while, although MRI scans can be quickened by the coroner. Is there anything you want to add to that? Okay. So that we just wanted to get through that just to make absolutely clear that there are processes that are involved. Usually the funeral director will guide people through all of these processes, but just to have an idea, and perhaps the most important thing is post-mortems. Post-mortems in Sharia are haram, because it involves opening up the human body, and there should be a push away from that wherever it's possible, so that the body is protected. But if it has to be done, it has to be done as a last resort. The next point, who's responsible? And here, when we look at who's responsible, speaking about who pays for the whole process. Who's responsible for the process, the costs involved? Who's responsible for the costs involved? I confirm this. As far as I'm aware, the biggest cost is the actual plot of land, which is over 2,000. It comes to over 2,000, right? Roughly around the whole process, around 2,500. Is that? That's right, around 2,500. Around the whole process, around 2,500. So who's responsible for that? First, we look at what's stated in Sharia, then we look at what people do. In Sharia, in Islamic law, it comes out of the wealth of that person. The wealth of that person, known in Sharia as tarika, is the estate that he leaves behind. Whatever property, whatever wealth that he leaves behind, that's known as his tarika, his estate, that will be dealt with in 4 stages. In most people's mind, whatever he leaves behind goes to inheritance. Inheritance is the last of the 4. The last of the 4. The first thing, any wealth that he has left behind will go to pay for his funeral costs. Will pay for his funeral costs. So that 2,500 will come out of whatever he's left behind. And then after that, and this will come in the last session, any bequests that he's stated, which needs a will, if he requests that a set amount of money goes to a charity, to a masjid, to a friend of hers, then that will come out of before that any debts that are outstanding that he owes people will come out of his wealth. And then the third, if there's anything left over from his wealth, then any bequest that he's made in a will, which is either verbal or written, that will come out of 1/3 of what's left over. And the Prophet ﷺ specified 1/3 of what's left over. And if any money is left over after that, that's the inheritance. But here, we'll come back to these points in the last session. Here, the important thing, who pays for the whole process? It comes out of the wealth that he's left behind. There's not if he's a wealthy person, he has nothing to worry about. It's only if somebody doesn't have anything, then we have further concern. So that's the first point. Who pays for it? Himself, from his own wealth. What about a person who has no finances left behind? What about somebody who dies poor?
You've gone ahead.
Have I gone too far? Did somebody else do this? If somebody dies and he has nothing, it is the person who's required to support that person whilst they're alive who's responsible. So again, it doesn't move beyond. If it's a child, it's the father. The father has to pay for it. If a wife dies, the husband has to pay for it. Anybody who is responsible whilst alive to take care of that person is required then to take care of the funeral expense. We have nothing to worry about. So it's either going to be from themselves or whoever is responsible. If there is no such person, then it's a kifaya on the community. The community has to take that responsibility. This was last week. Last week in Liverpool, an African brother in the community, his child dies, he was poor. So what happens? You do a whip round in the community and you cover the costs. A year ago, a brother from Liverpool died. The 2,000, he didn't have any Muslim family member. The 2,000, and he was poor. 2,500 was raised amongst the brothers. That's a responsibility. That's who pays for it? Himself, if he has one. If not, the family member was responsible for him whilst he was alive. If not, then the whole of that community has that responsibility. What that then removes is the idea of death committees. the idea of death committees. Like death committees, which are common in the community, are not needed in Sharia because Sharia has already sorted the problem out. You have 1 or 3 people who's going to deal with it, and that covers everything. And we don't need to create a system that's problematic within Sharia to cover something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given us. Who's responsible? The dead person himself. If not, the one who's responsible for him. If not, the community. The community as a whole. What's the problem with them with death committees? Depends how it's structured. The first thing, if that person's wealthy, why even put money away? Why even put money away? If you're wealthy, your money will take care of it. If you become bankrupt, then family members will take care of it. Somebody's going to take care of it. Somebody will take care of it. And again, correct me, I was told this, that if somebody dies and has nothing, there's actually a government fund available to pay for the costs of that. So the responsibility is on the Muslim community. Somebody within the community will take care of it. Problem with death committees, and most people at one level are involved in it. It depends on how it's structured. One way structuring, which is perfectly fine, family and friends come together and agree when somebody dies, we all chip in, we all cover. Almost like as a cooperative, we all agree. Nobody's putting in set amounts on a monthly basis, but if somebody dies amongst us, we all cover that. That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine because that's what would have happened anyway. Right? Even if they didn't do that, that's what would have had to have happened. Right? If you didn't have an agreement amongst family and friends that we chip in when somebody dies, even if that agreement's not in place, they're going to have to do it anyway. So that's already inbuilt within Sharia. If we now say amongst family that we have an agreement that any of us dies, then we'll pay for it together, that only works if he doesn't have any wealth. If he has wealth, then that will be taken out of his wealth. If he doesn't have wealth, then whether you have that agreement or not, family has to pay for it. Family has to pay for it. The problem is the more common system where you're paying a set amount in monthly, usually monthly, with certain conditions put in place, and then at the end when a person dies, a set amount will go for that person. The problem with that system is it's almost like an insurance policy. And here what you have what's called gharar. It's the unknown that's the problem there. How much are you putting in? You're entering into a contract where you're putting an amount that you're going to receive back. You're putting an amount. How much are you putting in? You don't know. You may die next week. You may die 60 years later. The problem is the uncertainty in the amount that you're putting in. That's known as gharar. That's the same as a life insurance policy. You don't know how much you're putting in to determine how much you're getting back. That causes a problem in Sharia. The simple way around it is the one when you have a cooperative. Well, the simplest way is just do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. It's taken out of that person's wealth, otherwise family takes care of it, otherwise the community takes care of it. And again, if we start pushing people towards that, then we don't need to create our systems that actually go against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in place. So we need to start moving away from death committees and reinstituting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in place, not what we've decided. It was understandable because when our parents' generation first came here, there were a lot of poor amongst them. And they devised a system to help each other. And it was more of an issue because at that time there's going to be a lot more people potentially could die who didn't have wealth. Now there's a lot of wealth in the Muslim community. So the problem is a lot less of an issue. And what's surprising to me is people who are wealthy are putting into these systems. Families who are wealthy are putting into these systems. You have it within your own family. You don't need to worry about it. Okay, do you want to change that one? I think this is the last one we're going to discuss. The last point, or converts. What happens when people become Muslims? General point about somebody becomes Muslim. The law states that the spouse and the next of kin has legal responsibility. If somebody becomes Muslim and he has no Muslim family member and he's not married, then it's the next of kin, which will be father or mother or siblings, who will have legal responsibility over them. We had an issue, we had a case of this in Liverpool many years back, where somebody became Muslim, never did anything legal about it, never wrote any will to cover the eventuality when he dies, what should happen. So what happened when he died? His non-Muslim family took the body and he was buried with a non-Muslim funeral. And they had the legal right, according to British law, to do that. And the non-Muslim who becomes Muslim and leaves that, it's his problem. He must ensure a legal document that he states that should I die, I want my body to be taken care of by the Muslim community. So that I'm given a Muslim burial. And again, because the Muslim community, they just concern themselves with things that don't really matter. In Singapore, they've dealt with it. The Muslim community there, for the new Muslim community, they have a Shahada certificate where on there it states that should I die or when I die, my body is dealt with as a Muslim. The moment that they sign that as a Shahada, then that's automatically in place there. Automatically in place. And that's something that has to be introduced. So somebody who's become Muslim must give authority to the Muslim community so that none of these things, no problem will take place, and all of these things will be taken care of by the Muslim community. So that's all running up to the point where we then move on to washing and shrouding the dead body. Next month we'll go on to a practical demonstration about how to wash a dead body and how to shroud the dead body, and then we'll move on to the janazah prayer and the burial and go to graveyards. We'll finish at that point. Alhamdulillah. Any questions, yeah? Questions? Any questions? If anybody wants to write them or if you want to ask them verbally, you're welcome to do that. Nice one with you. Love you too.
Any questions?
Yeah? Sister there?
Where? Did you say sister?
There's a sister in the middle there.
I think, yeah.
We've got 5 minutes left, haven't we? We can walk into the building. Sorry, before your question, there's a question that came from that side. Well, the question was, what's the right of a woman going to a graveyard?
That's what I was going to ask you. Just
That comes next month.
See, I lost my son.
Oh, okay,
I
sorry.
don't think this is working. Oh, is it? Oh, I lost my son 3 years ago, and I've tried to go to his grave, though. Somebody told me that you shouldn't really be going. So I'll go every like 6 months or so.
No, you're fine to go.
Oh, is it?
You're fine to go.
Oh, okay.
You're fine to go. We'll explain next month why many say that women can't go. But bear in mind that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, he said, I've forbidden you from visiting the grave. I've forbidden you from visiting graves. Visit them because it reminds you of the next world. So that order, visit them, applies for males as well as females. The later scholars generally forbade it, but the original opinion was that it's allowed. So we will discuss that in more detail. What is not allowed for a woman is to attend the burial. The death in itself, the burial, a woman is not allowed to be present there. But going to the graveyard itself, a woman is allowed to do that.
Can I ask one more question? While I was standing there beside his grave, somebody said to me, there was an elderly person, and he said to me, I'll stand towards the right, where he's, because he'll see you. I mean, I don't really know much about it. Is that true, or is that just...
I've not heard that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, thank you.
But we will speak about graveyards next time, about the etiquette involved in going to graveyards. The written question, is facing Qibla sunnah of a dying person? It is a sunnah as long as it's not going to cause too much difficulty. Like somebody's dying on a bed and they can barely move and you're trying to turn them around and you're causing them like pain and so on, leave them. But if you can turn that person's body towards the Qibla, it's the best way to do it so that his soul leaves his body facing the Qibla. That's the best thing to do. Sorry, yeah? Right,
So the husband becomes non-mahram to the wife as soon as she dies.
Yeah,
So that means he can't bathe her.
yeah, that's right. That's right, you can't bathe them. In some hadith it mentions Sayyidina Ali bathed Sayyidina Fatima. And the majority of the madhabs allow that, but the Hanafi madhab says no. and he explained Sayyidina Ali didn't actually touch her. He was giving instructions about how she should be washed to the women who were washing the body. There is a hadith that mentions Sayyidina Ali washed the body of Sayyidah Fatima. You understand that to be that he gave instructions about how to wash. Some said it was also specific to Ahlul Bayt, that it was only particular about Sayyidah Fatima and it didn't extend beyond. So the general rule, it is not allowed for the husband to wash the body of his wife, but the other way around is allowed. The wife can wash the body of her husband. I will explain next month why.
We have limited time. We have to be out of the building at 9:15.
Okay.
So we'll take one question from the audience and just one question that's written down here. And then if there's more questions, which I'm sure there will be, perhaps the people can write the question if you have a piece of paper and leave it outside.
So can I answer this one because this follows on from the last one. You said about husband not touching or kissing the wife. What about the other way around? The other way around is allowed. The husband dies, the wife can touch the body, she can wash the body, she can kiss her husband who's died. So the other way around is allowed. The husband, if the wife dies, becomes ghayr mahram, he can't touch. But the wife, because she's in iddah, there's still connection. Because she goes into iddah, her waiting period, which lasts for 4 months and 10 days, she still has a connection to him, hence she's allowed to do all of these things. Yeah.
It's to do with washing. When
Can we leave these till next month? Anything that we covered,
Okay.
because washing, we're going to go over washing next month.
Okay.
So anything that we covered today, because of shortage of time. Yeah?
If you're travelling out of town and you pass away,
No, then the body can be retained. The question, that's an important one. If somebody's travelling out of town and dies, or he's a traveller, then the body can be returned, provided you're just passing, you're just there for a few days, then the body can be returned. But if somebody's settled at a place, then no.
Let's say the whole like leaving the country as well. So
Yeah, leaving like,
One final question. I just
it's just a little coffee shop in a way.
Sorry, so to ask, earlier you mentioned when you shouldn't wait for people to come from different towns.
Yeah.
So what happens when you have a mix, like in the family, if some saying that wait, some people say not wait. So how do you deal with that?
Tell them that you're not waiting. That's how we deal with it. But then you need to convince them that the Prophet ﷺ told us not to delay. So some are saying, no, we should delay, then they're going against what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. But the points that we mentioned at the beginning, these points should be discussed within the household now rather than when a person died, so we avoid these arguments at that point. It should be instilled within households, and when somebody dies, that burial's taking place straight away. We're not delaying it. Allahu Akbar.
15 minutes. What, 5 minutes? 10 minutes to clear this. Do a lucky day.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that one next one. It's an important question. If a non-Muslim family member dies, as I am the only Muslim in my family, can I come to the funeral? A Muslim cannot take part in the religious aspects. So in terms of burial, in terms of washing and shroud, or anything that happens, a Muslim cannot take part within that. There's no harm in following the funeral procession, but as long as when the burial is taking place, that person steps back and doesn't take part within that. Can a menstruating woman visit the grave? Yes, she can. Yes, she can. And a menstruating woman can visit the grave. What we said before, she can't attend the funeral, and also during her iddah she can't go. If her husband just died, 4 months, 10 days, she should not be leaving the home. So during the iddah time, she cannot go, but after that, she can. There's a question on organ donations. We'll discuss that in detail next month. With regards to photographs of the deceased on Facebook, especially women without hijab, could you share a few words on this, please? This thing about sharing faces, sharing pictures of the face of someone who's died and so, it comes back to the point about respecting the deceased. There's a lot of like, it lessens the worth of that person where he's just died and people just like snapping pictures and posting them straight away, as though the most important thing at that point is I need to share this with the whole world. You should respect the deceased. If somebody's died and the burial and so, just leave that person's died, honour that person, the memories that you have with you, that's who you share it with, just leave it at that point. So people should try not to should try not to do that. Really should try not to do that. It really does dishonour the deceased. When washing bodies, there are any time requirements of how long it should take. We'll do that next month, but it should be done as quickly as possible. There should be no delay. Now, how long the washing takes place, that's a different point. And we will demonstrate that next month, so we'll get some idea. But it shouldn't be unnecessary delay. The sister there was hand up.
Siri.
Sorry, go.
Funerals of Shia.
Funerals of who?
Shia.
Shia. What about them?
I would like to attend.
If you know them not to be Muslim now,
The Jafri.
the Ja'fari Shia.
If you have non-Muslim friends but they are Christian or Jewish and the people of the book, can you pray for them?
No. Pray for them now. Pray for them now. The only thing that potentially you could pray for is a lessening of the punishment. Lessening of the punishment. But what we must be absolutely clear on, there's no shafa'ah for the unbeliever to take them out of hellfire. There's no shafa'ah. The unbeliever, absolutely clear from the Quran and the Sunnah, that it's to be cold and clinical, it's eternal punishment. There is some scope for a lessening of the punishment, the lessening of the severity of the punishment. So that's the extent of dua. But like, if it's a dua that Allah showers them with mercy or forgives them or takes them out of hellfire, that's impossible. That's impossible because Allah and the Messenger said you can't do that. So at that point, no. And that's why a couple of days ago somebody asked a question about, can we say for about a non-Muslim rest in peace? Can we say rest in peace? It depends upon what you understand by that statement. If it means like going to paradise and safe from punishment, so that's not what the Quran or the Sunnah tells. And here we shouldn't be overridden by our emotions and how we feel. We should not think that we're more loving of people than Allah and His Messenger. We should not think that that's a bit brutal, that's a bit too cold, and like why can't Allah forgive them? Because He said He's not going to. Because He could do. The Ash'ari theologian says He could do, but He said He's not going to. So can we make dua for them? Like I was asked a question. Somebody, and I asked one of my teachers when we were in Syria this question, can a person who's got no Muslim parents make the dua, رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْحِسَابُ? He said no. He said no. Our Lord forgive me and my parents. They died as unbelievers, then there's no, Allah will not forgive them because He stated it as such. Wallahu a'lam. Many communities have signed up to the death committee. What do? Do they just walk away from it? Should they get their money back? If you can't get your money back, then get your money back. And if you can't, good luck. Good luck. If you can, then you should do it. And just do it as the fuqaha states. Sorry, yeah, go on.
I have a question, and the question is that earlier on you mentioned that women, when a Muslim man dies, not to see the face unless they're related, very immediate family, a mother, wife, or sister, or daughter. It's very well, it's very resourceful, and hats off to Fatwa Initiative for arranging all this, and we're taking this information to take back into our community. But how about liaising with the mainstream mosques, and why are they allowing the bodies to be viewed by masses of women if it's not allowed?
No, sorry,
in our community.
Sorry, just a correction. It's the other way around. That's the problem. It's when men come and look at the faces of women. That's where the problem is.
The same about the women is you said that
that's
they're
not,
related.
No,
so
that's not. No.
So you can see anybody's face.
You can do, but it's not necessary. One point, it's not necessary. The whole process of just like putting a body out there and everybody come, it's not necessary. It's just at the point where a person died, if people happen to be there, then there's no harm in looking and kissing the face. But just to have a procession coming in, that's not necessary. I do agree with your point. They need to go and speak to the mosque and just stop telling them to do something about it.
On the day of the janaza, I mean, especially the both mosques, the main mosques, Fazan, Medina and Gosya, they have sort of the announcement, this time they'll have the janaza, but before that, when they bring the body into the mosque, there are masses of women viewing it. I'm not worried about the woman if it's a female, but if it's a male, and they shouldn't be, then I personally think that the committees should stop this from now on.
Yeah.
I agree.
Jazakallah for that point. We're just going to comment on that. Inshallah, the whole point of this exercise is that so we know what the...
minority, we're going to go back.
I totally agree. Lucas just say you need to start a revolution in the community.
Shaykh Haroon said that.
Yeah. Fatullah said that right now.
We've got you on video.